Good morning, everyone. Right? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I represent United Nations Regional Commission for Western Asia, but we work for the Arab states. That's what the slide shows you, the different Arab states that ESCWA supports the member states. A couple of them are still not ESCWA members, but we support the Arab states in the region, and the region is quite diverse. As you can see, Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries, high-income countries, middle-income countries, the Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia. Algeria is one of the countries which is though oil, net oil exporting, but it's a middle-income country. Lebanon is recently classified by World Bank as one of the countries with facing fragile and conflict-affected situations. But for the analysis of this work, it's till 2019, Lebanon is still a middle-income country. Least developed countries, and you can see that there are several countries in this region which are conflict affected. The reason of showing is this, that some of the statistics that I will show is grouped by these country groups. We are on the third day of the conference, and much has been said about taxation in terms of policy, in terms of concept, measurement, methodologies. Not much to say in terms of concept and policy, which resonates with the findings of this research as well. But some of the empirics is important to understand taxation in the Arab states, particularly when regional commissions starting 2015 onwards are looking at strengthening domestic resource mobilization more. We from ESCWA contribute to the Financing for Sustainable Development report every year, and much focus has been on domestic, mobilizing domestic public resources. As I represented the country groups in the region, you can see there is a clear distinction of raising resources as well. The GCC countries focus on oil and gas revenues. The middle-income countries focus more on taxation, except Algeria, which has a bit more of resources from the oil sector. The LDCs also focus on taxation, but also more on grants for the LDCs. The other in the graph represent customs, excise, and grants. And I'll show that the LDCs, the trend of grants is going down, and how high taxation is becoming more important. The second point I would like to highlight is that the region has been facing a declining growth rate. The growth is sluggish on an average, and also the revenues growth is very, very volatile. Of course, intuitively, it is because of the oil price fluctuations. When you look at the revenues to GDP across the sub-regions, you will see the total regional revenues is influenced by the oil revenues. But for the middle-income countries, it's about 25%. For the least developed countries, the total revenues is going down, primarily because of reduction in grants, as I will show in the next slide, that the tax to GDP in LDCs is almost flat. So there is a quite diversity in total revenues to GDP across countries, and it has remained below the average of emerging and market economies as per the IMF classification. And COVID-19 has impacted significantly further in mobilizing total revenues. When you look at the tax revenues, as I said, the middle-income countries are the one which depend on tax revenues. Overall, it is about 25% of GDP in 2020. But as you can see, the top line, which is almost flat over the years, except that in 2016 onwards, they have introduced several reforms which has led to slight increase in taxes to GDP for the middle-income countries. For the least developed countries, the purple line is almost flat over the years, but we see that the total revenues is declining. So in the sense that that's the envelope of grants to LDCs has been on a decline. On an average, it's it's not the right picture. On an average, the tax to GDP is like 8% of GDP. That's primarily because the GCC countries, the high-income countries, have a higher weight on GDP, but they do not rely on taxes. Rather, it's oil revenues. However, the regional diversity is obvious when you look at the tax to GDP ratio, and it also shows that with declining part of ODA to development needs, the mobilizing resources from taxation is important for the region. How do they do it and its distributional consequences? This graph shows that not only the middle income countries rely more on indirect taxes or taxes on goods and services, but over time the reliance has been increasing, which is not necessarily sometimes bad, but it is not necessarily a good sign. The more and more reliance on indirect taxes or VAT or introduction of VAT or increasing VAT rates, it affects the middle class or the salaried class or the low income earners more than the rich. Surprisingly, you will see that despite several efforts to raise taxes, the corporate income tax share in total tax revenues is on decline for most of the countries. And the reforms, as I mentioned in 2016 onwards, mainly in labor income, as Mario was highlighting in the previous sessions, that has led to increase in share of personal income tax mobilization bit more for these countries. Property tax is low, so the entire distribution of taxation, when you look at it for the countries for which data are available, it's more and more showing that the burden is more on the middle class and the low income earners than the rich. Fiscal incidence analysis for a couple of countries that I myself have done also shows that for the top rich, the burden of the taxation is lower than the fourth and third quintile of income distribution, and I would like to learn from other case studies in this session. Just look at the tax regimes and the tax rates and the reforms that countries have introduced. Quickly going over, there is a wide diversity in tax rates, and this is the latest point of reference, 2020-2021. We see that the standard VAT rate varies from 5% in UAE. The GCC introduced tax reforms and VAT recently to about 20% in Morocco in VAT rate. Bahrain this year doubled the VAT rate from 5 to 10%. Saudi Arabia last year tripled the VAT rate to 15%. So countries are relying more on introduction of the VAT rates. Similarly, personal income tax also differs widely. The top tier personal income tax varies widely across countries in the middle income countries. That's why I was raising a question that, okay, how this variation in tax rates affects perceptions for the people, the inequality across countries, since many in this region also depend on remittances and other instruments. It does have an impact on perceptions of inequality, and whether there is as a policy, whether there is a prospect for convergence of certain tax rates, particularly on the high income, for the high income earners. That's a policy question to discuss. Quickly over, as this slide shows, several countries have undertaken tax reforms, including increasing the top tier thresholds of labor income, or increasing the number of brackets. This is a database which we are developing from 2010 onwards. So 12 years of review of tax laws, and much analysis is still to be done, but this is an overview of showing that different measures have been introduced by the countries, particularly the middle income countries, including also taking out some exemptions, introducing capital gains or dividends tax, or taxing interest income. Both in terms of widening the tax base, they have also lowered the tax thresholds. So several countries have introduced in personal income tax. But as a simple measure, when you look at it, look at the top tier tax thresholds to per capita income, you will notice that for some countries there is an increase, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia to some extent. but it's still low for many countries, including Egypt. Is the timer? May I be allowed another 2 minutes?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And okay, then quickly going over these personal income tax thresholds. This slide, look at the right graph, which shows that ratio of lowest tax threshold to per capita income. If you look at that, it has decreased in several countries, including in Egypt or in Morocco, which shows that expanding the tax base, basically how countries is kind of distressed to improve tax base. More analysis to be done, understanding its progressivity, of course. This is the VAT reforms. I'll quickly go over to some critical slides, given the time. The tax measures on CIT is relatively low. Not many countries have introduced that many tax reforms over the last 12 years. Whatever the tax reforms have been done, the performance of tax is not encouraging, except in personal income tax for Tunisia, Egypt and Morocco to some extent. The reforms in CIT or VIT are not very encouraging in terms of mobilizing taxes or looking at the taxes as a share of total tax revenues. Efficiency, there is significant leakages. Efficiency or inefficiencies arise either due to policy gap. Policy gap means tax exemptions or different tax rates in VAT, or due to compliance gap, which is related with kinds of corruption or enforcement. And we show that the VAT efficiency of the region varies between 0.3 to 0.4 as opposed to the OECD VAT efficiency of 0.55. We will discuss that more perhaps during the question and answer session. The taxes, the perception of tax progressivity can improve compliance. We learned that in the first session or the first day of the conference. Also improving tax compliance can increase tax revenues, of course. Here I'm presenting you this exercise which the IMF developed a database on taxes and fiscal rules or different rules, expenditure rules, fiscal rule, budget balance rule, debt rule. And I'm trying to see that does only income matter for tax mobilization, as we learned. So two things we learned in the last 2 days. One, perception of tax compliance, tax progressivity matter. Two, income matters for improving tax mobilization. And this slide shows you, this is an exercise of 49 countries, data for 1990 to 2018, the panel, which shows that not only income matters, but investment in health, education, and housing does matter more. A revenue rule alone does not matter. Rather, it can act adversely in the sense that if you are putting up a revenue raising framework in the medium term, in isolation, it may not work as well, because how are we spending, how the government is spending, how the people are looking at if they are paying money in terms of taxes, what are they receiving. So this is where I think this result sounds intuitive, that if the countries that are spending more on health, housing, and education in this panel regression, it shows that the tax mobilization and compliance tend to improve with spending on critical social sectors. And that's where ESCO is also looking at the social expenditure monitor more detail, how budgets are going to different social sectors. Of course, the elephant in the room is scale of tax leakages. The Arab countries lose about 8.6 billion in annual tax revenue due to corporate tax abuse. This is an initiative which is led by Financing for Development team at ESCO, and that's contributing to the SG's report on illicit financing flows. There are policy briefs issued by Secretary General on this. In other words, increasing average effective corporate tax rates to match the Pillar 2 Globe tax and its application on all MNCs can raise about $9 billion worth of tax revenues. The policy recommendations, I think it has been discussed well throughout the 2 days. I will not delve much into it, but rationalizing tax exemptions, enforcing mechanisms, how it can improve it's still a big question. And I think as we improve the tax records and the data, and as it can be more available to public for analysis, that would help understanding more, rationalizing the taxes. And more importantly, I would say that not only assessing that, but making it public in budgets, the tax exemptions, making it public in the budget and connecting it to development targets, which is the aspect of rationalizing that should be made more clearer, other than better tax cooperation and cross-border cooperation for combating illicit financing flows and tax leakages. I'm sorry for taking this, some more time.
Thank you very
so much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if we may take comments following Dr. Ibrahim's intervention, and if I can ask Amira to come straight on board with her presentation. Amira is joining us online from Cairo. She's with the Faculty of Economics and Political Science in Cairo U, as well as with Abdellatif Jamil Poverty Lab, JPAL. So Amira, you have the floor.
Okay, I'm trying to share my presentation. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, 1 second. So can you see my presentation now?
Now we can. You may want to put it on full screen.
Okay. Is this better?
If you hold on 1 second.
Yes. So my presentation now is on full screen, I think,
Yes.
from my side.
Yeah, but it's not showing on the TV screens here.
Okay.
I think there was a delay when Niranjan was actually showing his slides, but
Okay. Just let me know when it appears.
you don't have it?
Okay, I can go on and try to share it again.
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes. Perfect. Okay.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me. So I will try to make my presentation as brief as possible. To be honest, I've seen all the interventions by the prominent colleagues working on taxation and social policy, and I thought, what could I add today? So I thought maybe I can add a different angle, focusing on taxation and social policy in the time of disasters or in the time of climate change related shocks. So I'll be presenting today on domestic resource mobilization for fiscal sustainability in the time of disasters. And this work has been like joint work by Iman, Mustafa, and myself on like several research projects. So let me start by giving you the big picture, or by the first the first high-level key takeaway. So the thing is that we have to admit that in the MENA region, we cannot just like discuss tax policy or like social policy without addressing the fact that we are facing climate change and environmental degradation, and this is the inevitable, and social policy will definitely be affected by that. And we know that the MENA region is one of the most affected regions by climate change and climate change related disasters. And here in this figure, you can see the occurrence of weather and health disasters in MENA and how natural disasters evolved over time with like an upward trend since 2016. And we all know that this trend would have and is already having serious implications on fiscal space for social policy in MENA. So that the narrative of the presentation is to give you some share with you my thoughts on how these disasters will definitely affect fiscal space for social policy, and how social policy needs to be adaptive in the MENA region to be able to mitigate the negative effects of these disasters. And you can see here in this exercise that natural disasters would definitely reverse social policy gains in low and middle income countries in general. And one example of these gains is the health gains. So in this table, I'm reporting the estimated short-run impact of health disasters on key maternal and child health indicators, specifically maternal mortality ratio, under 5 mortality ratio, and neonatal mortality ratio. And you can see here that natural disasters have a significant effect in the short run on maternal health and also on child health being measured by under 5 mortality and neonatal mortality. And you can see here that the situation is a little bit different in high income countries, where we don't observe any significant effects of these climate change related events on maternal and child health. So this is just to give you the big picture on how natural disasters would definitely kind of reverse the social policy gains achieved in low and middle income countries in general, with health gains as one example. We also would like to highlight that these disaster negative effects on social policy gains are persisting in low and middle income countries. And this would have tremendous impact on the fiscal sustainability and the fiscal space generally in the MENA region. So you can see here, and maybe in the interest of time, I can just focus on the table below. And you can see here in the table, we are calculating the long-run impact of health disasters also on maternal mortality and child mortality. And you can see here these kind of shocking coefficients that a natural disaster can kind of increase maternal mortality by 35%. 35% just 1 year after the disaster occurs. And you can see here the figures are more kind of shocking for under 5 mortality rates, with a natural disaster increasing under 5 mortality rate by 80% just 1 year after disaster occurrence. And also I'm reporting the figures for neonatal mortality rate. So this is just to give you the big picture on how disasters or climate change related events would definitely affect social policy. But also the bad news here is that these climate change related events affect social policy gains, but also affect the fiscal sustainability in MENA. So here I'm reporting the estimated short-run impact of weather disasters on budget balances in MENA. So I'm shifting from the health or the social policy effects to the budget balances effects. And you can see here that weather disasters have a significant negative effect on net lending borrowing and overall fiscal balances in the MENA region. And we are reporting the same estimates for health disasters. And again, you can see here the significant negative effects of climate change related disasters on the fiscal sustainability in MENA. So the key message here is that this is a big thing that we are kind of, many policymakers are overseeing, that we are acting in times of uncertainty. We have climate change related disasters that would have negative effects on both the social policy gains and also on the fiscal sustainability or the fiscal space in the MENA region. So it's kind of a double effect. Also, and similarly, we know that these climate change related disasters would have a persistent effect on fiscal sustainability in MENA. So it's not just the instantaneous or the contemporaneous effects on fiscal sustainability, but it's also the long run impact on budget balances in the region. And here you can see in these two highlighted coefficients how a natural disaster can negatively affect net lending borrowing and the overall fiscal balance in the region after 1 year. And you can see here that the effects are specifically significant for weather disasters versus health disasters. So now come the question, okay, we know that we will be already facing these disasters in the MENA region, but how can we mitigate the negative effects of these disasters on fiscal sustainability in the region? And again, when we are talking about fiscal sustainability, we care about the fiscal space that would be available for social policy. So if we don't have the fiscal space, we know that the social policy will definitely be affected in a negative way. And I can draw your attention here to the highlighted coefficients, which basically indicate that domestic resource mobilization in MENA can mitigate the negative disaster effects on budget and fiscal balances versus external financing. And maybe I can draw your attention to the coefficient of the sovereign wealth funds and how they can kind of absorb the negative effects of disasters on fiscal sustainability in MENA. And also here, importantly, business taxes and how their effects or their mitigating effects on fiscal sustainability is highly significant in the region. And so basically here, the main message is that domestic resource mobilization could have play a more significant role than external financing to mitigate the negative effects of disasters on fiscal sustainability. And I would like to highlight here the insignificant coefficients of external debt and grants, etc. Because personally, I believe, and based on the recent experience by Egypt on approaching the IMF for loans, etc., this can be kind of a quick fix, but at the end, we know that these external debt tools, the grants and everything would not fix our fiscal sustainability issues in MENA in the long term. So I just want to highlight that domestic resource mobilization could play a significant role and kind of draw the attention of policymakers to better use these versus resorting automatically to external sources of finance. Maybe I can skip this, but I was also would love to highlight that the mitigating effects of domestic resource mobilization on fiscal sustainability are also significant when it comes to our domestic resources versus external financing. But maybe I can skip this slide for the interest of time. In the interest of time, and I can go straight away to the high-level reflections and policy implications. So my own based on these research projects, our own thinking is that the MENA region has been suffering from truncated economic transitions. We know that we will be facing climate change-related disasters, and we know that these disasters would have serious implications for economic growth and the social agenda in MENA. Unfortunately, what exacerbated the situation is that we are kind of having a situation where we have lack of accumulation of knowledge and we have short interrupted reform episodes. And this has basically led to interrupted growth and human capital development episodes. We are suffering in the MENA region, and specifically, maybe I can refer to North African countries, from fiscal myopia. Here we are having a situation where governments typically find it more convenient to focus on spending that generate short-term effects rather than long-term social gains. And we can see here in Egypt and other North African countries, we are overusing public employment to maintain social peace and consensus versus underfunded public health education systems. And as the previous presenter mentioned, that we need to have these gains when it comes to social human capital investments, when it comes to health education. And this is not just isolated from the fact that investing in health, investing in education, resilience in general, can kind of create fiscal space in the future to address inequality issues and to kind of expand the social policy agenda. And one key takeaway is that MENA countries, they can basically strengthen their fiscal resilience to natural disasters by mobilizing domestic resources, which have found to be the most effective disaster mitigation strategies. And to do this, to strengthen domestic resource mobilization, we have to consider effective tax policy for expanding fiscal space. And I know that colleagues here can elaborate further on that. And over the past 2 days, I've seen a lot of insights on how we can make the tax policy effective. So I can skip this in the interest of time. And I can draw your attention to what could be like what could create sustainable social gains, and what could create or like what could strengthen fiscal sustainability in the long run. And this kind of intersects with the fiscal myopia discussion we have just had. So generally, we have, like in the MENA region, we have to invest in human capital, we have to invest in infrastructure, and we have to invest in resilience. And this can sound as like long-term goals, but at the end, we know that we will not be able to make it unless we focus on these big thematic areas or pillars. And we cannot just, personally, I don't think we should go and like approach external sources of finance and oversee the cost effectiveness of these investments on the long term. Sometimes this can be like not very appealing to policymakers who prefer to go for quick wins. But again, these are the determinants of progress when it comes to social policy agenda and when it comes to fiscal sustainability in the long run. And finally, I would like to draw the attention of the audience that the big picture matters. So we can discuss how we can make tax regimes effective. This would strengthen domestic resource mobilization, but we also need to focus on effective government institutions, transparency, and this is something that we are very much lagging in the MENA region. And also we have to improve public spending. So we know that, yes, business taxes and effective business taxes or like effective tax regimes in general can strengthen domestic resource mobilization, can help us strengthen our social policy agenda. These are like, we are fine, all as researchers, we are fine with this. But again, we can't ask people to pay taxes or like to like kind of, we can't as policymakers advocate for a broader tax base, effective tax regimes, while we are overseeing the effectiveness of government institutions and the transparency or public spending and how this public spending takes place in the MENA region. Also, like besides domestic resource mobilization, it's always important to kind of see that, okay, public resources are very much important and they are like the key to expand our social policy agenda. But also, what about private sector finance? How can we improve our business climate? How can we develop local markets? How can we mitigate investment risks in the times of certainty we are facing? And mostly in the MENA region, where it's a very vulnerable region to climate change effects, to natural disasters in general. So how can we complement domestic resource mobilization for a better social policy or a better social agenda in the region? So I just wanted to complement what my prominent colleagues have been discussing over the past 2 days, and maybe bring the angle of uncertainty to the equation when it comes to taxation and when it comes to social policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Amira. We'll go straight to Dr. Ibrahim Badawi. Dr. Ibrahim Badawi is the Managing Director of the Economic Research Forum, and he's former Minister of Finance in Sudan, Minister of Finance and Economic Planning in Sudan, 2019-2020. Dr. Ibrahim, the floor is yours. Dr. Ibrahim, have we got you?
Okay, I'm muted.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sherine, and many thanks to Dr. Niranjan and Dr. Amira for very interesting presentations and very interesting papers. I would like to start first by, according to the order, the paper by Dr. Niranjan really is a very comprehensive tour de force, so to speak, on taxation in the Arab world. Very impressive empirical content, and which also allows gleaning important empirical regularities, and eventually also, of course, very useful policy implications and recommendations. You know, I have just a few complimentary comments to make on this excellent paper. The question about tax, I think this is, I find this the most fundamental results in the regression, that actually the effectiveness of tax rules or in general fiscal rules is contingent or conditional on social services driven state legitimacy. Yeah, essentially, which I think is another point also, the same point emphasized by Dr. Amira in her paper. So I think this is a profound result, that actually it's not just, it's very important to move from discretionary macroeconomic policy, including fiscal and monetary and exchange rate policy, into rule-based macroeconomic policy. But then the sustainability of the fiscal rules itself, as well as effectiveness, depends on the legitimacy of the state. And the legitimacy of the state is very much contingent on robust and effective social service delivery. And this is a very profound point, in my opinion. And I would like to add a few things to strengthen this result. So the regression analysis of Dr. Niranjan's paper, I think, could be strengthened by bringing some complementary kind of evidence on data from the World Value Survey, because actually the World Value Survey has provided some very interesting insight in the area of cooperation by the public in terms of paying taxes. And it shows very clearly that the public tends to cooperate with the state and be responsive only when they feel that the state is capable and willing to deliver public goods. And I think this would strengthen the results and give some kind of credibility to the regression analysis by bringing in this important and Jim Robinson, for example, economic historian, and well known for his work with Daron Acemoglu on why state failed, and so it would be very, very useful to bring that dimension. In terms of the fiscal rule, this is a point which I will also make with regard to the second paper. It's actually very good also to show, an example from a country that's successful. And I think here, in terms of fiscal rule, the example of Chile would be very interesting in terms of the robustness of the fiscal rules in Chile, and it is linked to monetary policy, and so the extent to which actually this has helped Chile to expand the tax base and effectiveness of taxation, I think, would be very useful. The missing point or the elephant in the room really for the Arab countries is the digitalization, because now we are living in the age of the digitech age, and it's very clear that actually digitalization is a very effective instrument, in promoting tax systems, and I think there is enough data now about digital platforms and its effectiveness in promoting tax systems. I think would be useful to have, or at least cite some examples as to countries that have been able to leverage the digitalization, not only in terms of the technical aspects of the digitalization for containing tax avoidance and tax evasion, but also in terms of enhancing the legitimacy of the state through enabled cash transfer systems, because the value of digitalization is that it allows the state to build a social contract directly with the most important elements of society, which is the household. Household receiving direct cash transfers tremendously enhances the legitimacy of the state. It sharpened the effectiveness of the social contract. And of course, it contained corruption, because most of the cash transfers, which was done by the traditional means, they tend to experience some leakages and so on. And finally, I would like also to suggest a book by the IMF, which I actually contributed the paper to on exchange rate. It's called Macroeconomic Policy in Fragile States. I don't know if you can see it. But anyway, this book has a very interesting section on fiscal fragility. And unfortunately, many of our countries which collects less than 15% of GDP are characterized by the Fiscal Affairs Department as fiscally fragile states. And they have actually very good recommendations that might be very useful to take into account. Again, finally, on this paper, for the oil-rich countries, there is a very kind of creative but adventurous proposal by Shanta Devarajan, former chief economist of the Middle East region at the World Bank and a professor for practice of development at Georgetown University. And he argues that countries like Kuwait need actually to treat its citizens like shareholders in this company, which is the oil business or oil resources, and actually give them shares on annual basis or whatever, and make them responsible for managing their affairs, and then and maybe levying taxes on them. And this will enhance the legitimacy of the state and also encourage the households to manage their own affairs. It's an interesting proposal for the oil-rich countries, especially the GCC countries, that might be of interest. Okay, now I'm sorry, I think I might have taken a little bit more of my time, but very quickly, let me go to the second paper by Dr. Amira, which is an equally interesting and compelling paper, especially, of course, the fundamental conclusion that domestic resource mobilization matters a great deal and actually trumps external financing, especially debt financing. And I think it's very important to emphasize why this is so. In my opinion, this is so because actually high saving rates and also sovereign wealth funds, national sovereign wealth funds, provide control to the authorities that is not available when you are depending on external finance, because external finance tends to be very susceptible to global economic conditions and also conditions of the creditor countries, and in almost always entails some very serious consequences for the recipient countries. If we take the example of Egypt, for example, the high interest rate, I think is extremely devastating for the competitiveness of the economy, because it maintains a very strong exchange rate, even though some people might see exchange rate as a symbol of sovereignty, but this is really a very ill-informed and misguided perception. Exchange rate is an instrument for signaling for resource transfer within the domestic economy. And when the economy is not sufficiently modernized, exchange rate should be competitive. But then as the economy become, technically strong, with technical upgrading and high productivity, over time, the exchange rate becomes strong. And the experience of China and the experience of post-World War II Germany and Japan makes this very clear. So I think the high interest rate and the excessively overvalued or appreciated currency, these are the consequences of depending on other savers, foreign savers, to provide money for you. And that's why I think this is a very important conclusion. Okay. I think the econometric is very compelling and very strong, and I think the authors have actually provided a very convincing case. Just have a few complementary comments here. I would say that the Z variable should be extended to include other variables that already Amira and her colleagues analyzed in a companion paper, because they are they indirectly affect sustainability through the incidence channel, such as the robustness of the health system. Because actually, if the system is not robust, then when a health disaster, hit, you have to transfer money to the Ministry of Health, and then you have to borrow more in order to meet, the requirement of the impact of the health effect. If your infrastructure is not strong, then you have actually you will be reeling under a heavier impact of the climate change than otherwise. So I think the Z variables, in addition to the, for example, the business tax and the debt and sovereign wealth fund, might actually consider extending the D variables. I think Amira is quite fascinating that she focused on transparency and effectiveness, but rather than using the indicators of government effectiveness and voice and accountability, which I think are much more relevant to the sustainability of the budget than electoral election or legislative election. I think this is one area that really needs fixing, in my opinion, that actually using the right governance indicators would be much better. Very quickly, I see that the chair lady wanted me to finish quickly. Just 2 minutes and I will finish. The Z variable also may have non-monotonic effect, because actually, if you have rents like Algeria or Yemen, it's very different from the GCC, because their rents is so significant, so much so that actually it allows the state. So perhaps maybe sticking a square variable there would be important for some of these Z variables. Finally, let me just quickly say alternative specification for future research. From the econometric perspective, I really like Hashim Pisaran's pooled mean group estimator. The reason why, as an alternative or as other econometric strategy, it allows you to estimate a country invariant short-run effects as well as error correction effects in conjunction with a long-term country invariant long-term effect, but it gives you the flexibility of a country-specific short-run effect and error correction effect. These are very important for the problem at hand, because the estimated short-run coefficient could actually also subsequently be modeled as dependent on the Z variables, such as the robustness of the health system, of the infrastructure, and these are really very important. I see there is not much time, but I think this would be a promising area to consider in the future. And I have done such a paper on the exchange rate, and also my colleague Norman Loaiza have done a very interesting paper on the financial development and financial fragility using this. Finally, I would say that you could leverage more your results in terms of using the estimated results, for example, in table 4 and 5, in order to show the level of rents that would allow you to completely counterbalance the negative effect of the shock. And so which countries is so well endowed with rents, and this will bring in the GCC vis-a-vis Algeria and others. And then also in terms of the level of debt that can actually, at the level of sovereign wealth fund. So this might be some empirical kind of articulation that might be useful to consider. So thank you very much. I enjoyed both papers, and I would like to, recommend the 2 papers for the audience. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. I think this was a very rich landscape that we've shared. We should have asked GDN for 2 panels, I think, to do this justice to all our panelists. But if we have questions from the floor, we can take perhaps 1 question or 2 questions, and then we move to do justice for our, yes? Okay.
It's Howard White. Thanks everyone for the very interesting presentations. So what surprised me was the absence of explicit mention of social contract, though it was implicit in a lot of, particularly what Amira was saying. And so the nature of a social contract is what underlies the ability to tax the population. There's a caveat here for the region, because of course countries that enjoy high levels of oil revenue or aid income, that drives a wedge between the need to have a social contract, to have a tax base to fund services for the population, because government gets income from elsewhere. But putting that aside, the MENA countries suffer a common problem across the developing world, that the income, the domestic income, domestic revenue, is largely paid by the middle classes, but the middle classes don't use health and education services provided by the government. They increasingly and almost exclusively now use private health and education services. So the traditional social contract, which you see 40% of GDP in developed countries largely underlying health and education provision, doesn't exist in these countries. So the question is, what is the social contract then? What are people getting in exchange for the tax income that's going to be of interest to the middle classes in particular, who pay most of the tax? So Amira touched on this when she mentioned government jobs, because that is a main thing, that people want government jobs and they're not productive jobs, so that's a bad thing. And the other thing is infrastructure. So look, Egypt's a good example now of a massive road building program going on, but that's also bad. I mean, I'm not against infrastructure, but what all the literature shows is investment in human capital is what drives long-run growth. And if you go for an economic growth-oriented development strategy, in the end you will fail. You've got to invest in human capital. So the MENA countries are falling in this trap, and Egypt really is a good example of this, of insufficient investment in human capital, education, health, and so on for the masses, but there's no political support for that because they're not the ones paying the taxes. So the question would be, what's the acceptable level of taxation in these countries, given the nature of the social contract? And it seems like it's probably less than 15%, which, as we heard from Dr. Ibrahim, the IMF puts you in a sort of basket case category. And what sort of nature, how can the social contract be re-engineered to be more growth and equity oriented?
Thank you, Howard. I think, Ariane, you wanted to make a comment?
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the presentations, and my comment was very similar. I was very happy. I was like, what do we know about the social contract? I was happy that Dr. El-Badawi said, like, oh, there is world value survey data, and I'd love to hear more about it. What I don't think you, and I come from a country like where people, I understand that social contract services are provided. We're kind of happy to pay taxes. I mean, reasonably happy, right? And under that, an existing social contract. But we don't. And the World Value Survey would probably show that. I'm guessing. But we don't. I don't actually hear anything about how this can change, right? It's not that I in the Netherlands make a conscious choice to pay taxes. No, that's an existing social contract. There is a penalty on not paying taxes, right? It's not an individual. So in that status that Howard just describes, like, I think it'd be really valuable to think about kind of the research that contribute to see how you can shift the social context where there isn't that support. Niranjan, you said there's like there is this evidence of that good public services enhance compliance, right? But and I really would love to know is like, but what do we actually know about any change in that, how that happens? If there are good examples, I think it'd be really valuable to pull those out.
Thank you very much. I think we have one last question, if we can take that, and I'll give the mic to Niranjan to respond.
Thank you so much. Austin Irauya from Nigeria. I love when I had, as also mentioned already by the previous speakers, on social contracts. With evidence from Nigeria, we've had a little kind of experiment on that, and one thing we discovered is that it really proved effective in, first of all, it helps to re-engineer the minds of taxpayers, because as we know, ordinarily no one wants to pay tax. So one thing we discover is, in the course of social contract, now the people see it as an avenue where, one, they have a deep understanding of why they are paying tax, one. Two, they have a sense of responsibility and accountability on the part of the policymakers. So that is one evidence I discovered about the effectiveness of social contract in enhancing fiscal revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherine. Thank you for the excellent comments by Dr. Ibrahim. I think I'll just go by the order. Yes, well taken, all the complimentary comments well taken. The paper was prepared as a chapter for the Economic and Social Survey, and yes, in terms of research, we can enrich it with these valuable comments. On World Value Survey, definitely, and fiscal rules in Chile will incorporate that. On digitization, I think this is a stream of work that ESCWA is also trying to work with member states. What can be a digitalization roadmap for taxation? The issue is data. I mean, data and evidence. Data, this kind of taxation, it requires data, and in this region, it requires institutions to provide you data, and the institutions, it's just that to get the data, it is backed by some kind of law on data confidentiality. So unless that is changed, it's very difficult to get hard evidence to understand the distributional consequences of different policy instruments. So this is where we are also trying to work with member states how things can improve in terms of making the evidences or the data available in some countries at least. For example, Tunisia and Jordan have been very encouraged, and they have been encouraging example from them to disseminate data, to provide data on expenditures at detail level, to understand where expenditures are channeled and who are the beneficiaries. So this is one area definitely to improve, and unfortunately that's not the case in other countries, but it's not a overnight journey. It takes time, and I think efforts are being put up at how data can be made available to better policy decisions. The question on social contract in the region, I have been in the region for 10 years, and ESCWA did a report on Vision 2030. We have other middle class reports, which I am part of, and we have been discussing the issue of social contract. And the latest report on inequality, which was published a couple of years ago, also revisited social contract. It was with ERF, with Dr. Ibrahim El-Badawi. So when you look at, it's not that the middle class do not use the services, but yes, in some countries the evidence shows that out-of-pocket expenditure on health is disproportionately high from the private, and the education and health services are not adequate. So we are coming up with a social expenditure monitor report, which will be released on 24 November with UNDP and UNICEF. It's a regional one, and then Dr. Ibrahim El-Badawi will also be joining that meeting. We're showing that not only the social expenditures are inadequate, but also they are inefficient. So the cost of service delivery is very high as compared to the benchmark countries. You can look at it globally, or global middle income countries. What can be done to enhance the social contract? That's a big question mark. To improve efficiency, can they? There is a significant amount of interest among the member states, whether it is in GCC, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, the countries that we are working with, also in the middle income countries, Tunisia, Jordan primarily, and Egypt. These countries, if I look at it, there is a tremendous interest to improve efficiency. At the same time, the laws in those countries restrict to share detailed data to understand where the problem lies, to identify the problem. So it's a process of evolution. I think as we proceed, we will try to see what kind of evidence, because it requires that kind of hard evidence to understand where are the inefficiencies. Of course, in general, one can say that improve governance, improve efficiency in governance, but the devil lies in the detail. And it's a evolutionary process. It's not that institutions are built in 5 years or 10 years. One example is Tunisia, for example. After 2010, Tunisia has been a bit more restrictive in disseminating data. I mean, recently, for the past 10 years or so, it was very open data, open initiative, and open to criticisms. But now, in the past couple of years, it's a bit more restrictive. So institutions also are changing. So we need to make constructive efforts to engage with them, to provide that, to convey the message that better data can lead to better analysis and rationalizing tax expenditures, rationalizing expenditures, and improve its effectiveness. It's something which I'm taking away from this conference as well. So changing this will just take time, and at every level there should be efforts to change that, from research, from international organizations, as well as engaging with government more systematically.
Thank you very much. I have a big challenge that this session should go on till 10:30, and we're terribly late, and we've got 2 more interventions and Dr. Kabbashi's presentation. So I'll take last words from Dr. Amira and Dr. Ibrahim towards the end of the session. And if I may ask Dr. Dorothee and Dr. Touhami to actually proceed with we have 2 main interventions, that next part. One intervention is by Dr. Dorothee and Dr. Touhami, who are joining us online. And they are both from the Africa Institute for Research in Economics and Social Science, Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, Morocco. And we've got Dr. Mohammed Tosun in person with us, who would be also following with a presentation, and Dr. Kabbashi. So if I may ask Dr. Touhami to proceed with Dr. Dorothee, and please, let's try and make it in, maybe I should request 7 minutes, so if we run into 10 minutes would be okay. And then if Dr. Mohammed also would like to join us here on the panel. Okay. And Dr. Kabbashi. Dr. Dorothee and Dr. Touhami, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Then I will begin. Then good morning, everyone. We present you a new paper, very new paper. Then we have the result. They are always very warm, and we are sorry for to have not sent the paper because it's not finished. And we have only the presentation for the reviewer. We are sorry. Then it's an article done with Dr. Abdelkhalek on contribution of fiscal measure and subsidies and their impact on poverty and inequality in Morocco. And we use Shapley decomposition to make this decomposition. Quickly, the background. I think that we all know that the main social and economic role of government is to improve and maintain the standard living of the population. And they put in place some tools, some redistributive tools based on direct and indirect taxation. But the problem is sometimes the effectiveness of this system is not guaranteed for several reasons, such because sometimes the combinations of these components could even increase poverty and inequality. And we know also, as we mentioned previously, that this combination, even they are the same in countries, the effect or the impact are not always the same. Then we have to be prudent with this kind of policy and reforms. In Morocco, we are actually in a huge reform of the value-added taxes and income tax, especially since the third national assise. And also there is a huge discussion on social protection system at the same time. Then the objective of these reforms are to fight poverty, improving the living condition of most vulnerable people, and also reduce inequality, and also strengthening the middle class. The question of the objective of this article is to question the efficiency of this fiscal policy here in Morocco, and we have three main contributions in this article. First, we update the work done before by Abdelkhalek and Ejenawi, and also by ERF. And we update with the new data for 2019. Obviously, we enhance this previous work by conducting a distributional analysis and with other tools that we have in your box. In our box. And finally, the main contribution is to assess the contribution of each tax component, tax and subsidies, to the variation in welfare measure, for poverty measure and inequality measure. And for that, we use the Shapley decomposition method. Very quickly, some generalities on Moroccan fiscality. We have had a tax reform in the 18th. We have a creation of the General Tax Code, and actually in 2019, the tax GDP ratio was around 13%. It's the only number that I will give for this point, but of course we can develop, and in the article it will be developed. We have two main taxes: income taxes and value-added tax. And a priori, the income tax is progressive. As you can see, we have a progressive scale, as we find in a lot of countries, of course. For the value-added tax, it's a tax put in place in '86. We know that this kind of tax are not necessarily progressive among consumers. And actually, in Morocco, we have some products without taxation, and we have four range of taxation, as we can see, then 7, 10, 14, and 20. And the majority of products have a taxation of 20%. For the subsidies side, we have a direct and indirect transfer. always with the objective to fight poverty and reduce inequality. And we have a compensation system here in Morocco. Actually, 3 products are subsidized: the flours, sugar, and butane gas. And there is a lot of discussion actually about this compensation subsidized. Here it's to have an idea of the subsidized for these products. We have also subsidized to households via services such as education and health, and also direct or indirect subsidized always for the households or individuals. And we use these, we will look for this kind of subsidized in our article. In terms of methodology, the general framework, we adapt a micro-simulated approach developed by the Commitment to Equity Assessment, developed by Lustig and Higgins, to assess taxation and public expenditure system. This methodology has been applied in many countries, and specifically in the MENA region, in Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, and in Morocco, with the 2 papers that I mentioned previously. The idea of this methodology, always very quickly, we observe the final income in the survey, and we reconstruct other income information and consumable income, disposable income, and market income. And we construct also each tax and benefits or subsidies that we find in the economy. Then we observe the final income, and we construct the counterfactual for each component. Always in terms of methodology, we have done a punctual analysis and a distributional analysis. And as I mentioned previously, the main contribution is the Shapley decomposition. Then this methodology allows to evaluate the contribution of each component on welfare index. And the principle is to measure the marginal effect of the successive elimination of each component, take one by one, and to make an average of this combination, and to avoid the problem of past dependency. And we can interpret this the result as with the fact that this average is the contribution of each component to the indicator of interest, and our indicator are poverty and inequality in our case.
Okay, thank you, Dorothee. On that framework, we apply. We are using a survey from the ONDH, Observatoire National de Développement Humain. It's a survey. It's a panel survey. So we use this the wave of the last one we have, and we use it for on the national level and also for rural and urban. The particularity of this survey that we have 24 sources of revenue income for each individual in the household, for each individual, and we aggregate for each household, and we have the expenditure for products. It's a really detailed expenditure for each household. And we have obviously all the characteristics for individuals in each household. When using the framework presented by Dorothee before, we have the final income, constricted final income for each household. We have the expenditure, obviously, and we have also the consumer income and disponible income and market income. Using that, the data and this framework, we can calculate all poverty and this, and inequality indices. So for example, for the FGT0 for incidence of poverty, we can remark that when using all subsidies and taxation, the poverty index with using the relative threshold, relative poverty line, the poverty income is divided by 2, principally comparing the situation at the national level from the market income and the final income. We can see that also for urban and rural area. We can look at the expenditure also. When we examine the Gini and tail and this is for the same variable, also there is the two indices decrease between the market income. It's the counterfactual situation. If we have not the fiscal system and there is no subsidies, with the final income, the observed one, we have the indices decrease between the two situations. Is a punctual analysis for that. We can also look for the distributional income, and as we can see here, there is a shift of the distribution of the density to the right between the income in market income and final income. So there is clearly some tendency of the poverty decrease between the two variables. We can use some stochastic dominance using the two variables particularly, and we can see here there is a dominance of the second between the two curves, at least for some level of the poverty line we can consider. We did some stochastic dominance for second order, and we confirmed that there is the system of subsidies and taxation is at least for one level. It's a proposed situation. We did some incidence curve. We construct a incidence curve of the same with two level urban and rural area. As you'll see here, the incidence curve are clearly decreasing. So the system in Morocco is more proper than what we have in the literature. And so we can look at for the progressivity and degressivity of income tax, for VAT, and in our paper on the presentation we have more detail on that, but I have no time to go in. I prefer to use the last 2 or 3 minutes to
yes, please, 2 minutes,
yes.
because we've actually got Dr. Mohammed having to leave for the airport. Okay. So
I can present just the last one because it's, I think that the more important result we have in this paper is when we are looking the contribution from that Shapley decomposition. It's the first time we did that in Morocco. We looked at the more important contribution to reduce poverty and inequality is the subsidy for primary and secondary school. I think it's a very important message to politicians that we have not to touch that, because this component is the more reducing poverty and inequality. We can see also for what's the situation on tax and income, or other tax on income or the VAT, the contribution of that to increase the poverty, but to decrease inequality. This is also an important thing. In conclusion, I think we have many results which we can use from the micro-simulated approach when you are using the commitment to equity assessment, as we present here. We have results for urban area, rural area, and in the national level, and it gives us very important information to that when we have to reform the tax reform or subsidy system in Morocco, and we can contribute for the debate here in Morocco. As Dorothee told you in the introduction, it's in the table and in top on the agenda here in Morocco. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Touhami. Thank you, Dr. Dorothee. I'll go straight to Dr. Mohammed Tosun. Dr. Mohammed Tosun is with the University of Nevada, Reno, and the floor is yours. Dr. Kabbashi.
All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and start. So I have full screen on my screen, but it's looking a little different over there. Sorry everyone. Like I guess I'm kind of rushing the session a little bit. I probably should have like booked a different train to the airport like maybe at a later time. But I guess the good news from the audience perspective is that I have all the right incentives to keep my presentation really short. So I really need to finish like within 7-8 minutes. So well, not that okay, not that quickly. I'm not that quick. Sorry. I'll try my best. So this is a joint work with two individuals. One is actually a faculty, a professor of finance in my department, and one from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And so we started working on corporate policies. Two other papers like published on this, looking at tax uncertainty, looking at trade credits, and corporate investment. So we said, well, like how about corporate and like some social goals, and especially corporate taxation and business investment. Okay, I think it's fine from my perspective, but okay, better. All right. Okay, so yeah, so two, of course, like very important like sort of angles into inequality, taxation and inequality. Obviously, something that a lot of people looked at, and with corporate taxation, especially, you probably know the arguments that we can raise the corporate tax rates to address inequality. There's the famous Harberger result about like taxes being shifted to return to capital, and then through that inequality. But the incidence theory is basically talking about like other possibilities. If you think about the general equilibrium theory, forward shifting the consumer prices or backward to returns on labor or capital, to the extent that it is to consumer prices or labor, we could be looking at actually a little different result, right? So we could be looking at corporate tax almost like appearing as less progressive or more regressive, I guess. The empirical evidence on this is mixed. There's a nice survey that point out that to the extent that the businesses move to non-corporate sector, they bypass the corporate tax, so that actually doesn't help with the inequality reduction. Or few studies from Europe actually found pretty substantial impact. Almost about half of the taxes shifted to wages, and of course that obviously wouldn't help with the inequality either. Now the other component, the capital expenditures. So we're coming from the fact that during the pandemic there has been this kind of like boom in business investment. So in the US, one number I remember was a 15% increase on an annual basis in business investment. But if you look at the period before, the investment has been pretty sluggish, right? So very stagnant capital expenditures. So the businesses could very easily take the business profits to dividends and like stock buyouts and things like that. That obviously doesn't help with inequality. But they could obviously be putting into R&D expenses, capital expenditures, that would lead to economic growth and employment creation, and that will actually help with the poverty reduction, right? So that's the thing that we are thinking that which one is it? I mean, to the extent that we have capital expenditures, business profits going to capital expenditures, we can actually help with the poverty and inequality. So in this research, we are examining the role of both of these things using a big data set, 87 countries over a period from 79 to 2018. We include a number of MENA countries. The data is not great, but we still have some of those. And we look at the interactions with the MENA, to see if the results are different for the MENA countries specifically. And we have data on inequality, poverty from the World Bank, and the corporate-related variables are coming from the global CompuStat. So we're looking at these at the firm level, right? And then we have a bunch of control variables that the literature has used in this kind of research. Our inequality measures are Gini index, the income share held by the richest 10 and 20%, and the income share by the poorest 20 and 10%. So robustness of the results, to see the robustness, I mean, we have these alternative inequality measures. And we also have the poverty measures such as poverty gap and head count. Our tax rate variable is not statutory tax rates, but it is the cash effective tax rate, which is the actual cash tax paid by the firm divided by the pre-tax income, right? So it's the effective tax rate, not the statutory. Capital expenditure is, we do it with and without R&D expenses. We find the same result. Scaled by the beginning of year total assets. You see the regression equations. I'm not going to get into that. And I'm probably going to skip this one as well, like for the interest of time, which basically talks about like the sluggishness in the capital expenditures and relatively high inequality over there. So results, corporate expenditure, cash effective tax rate to inequality, we have a positive and significant. So higher corporate taxes actually raise inequality, and it is actually pretty significant across all measures. So that's kind of interesting, and we don't really see any difference, like for the MENA countries specifically, and lagged variable give us the same result. For capital expenditures, negative and significant, which means that higher capital expenditures for with or without R&D, it doesn't matter, actually reduces the inequality measures. Interestingly, right? So it is, again, it is to the extent that these actually lead to growth, employment creation, income, that will help. So this could be happening through the poverty aspect. So that's why like we actually wanted to look at the poverty specifically, and lo and behold, like we find the results that we expected, that the capital expenditures also tend to reduce the poverty gap. Which is interesting. So with all these things, when we interact with the MENA, we don't see any significance. So that may mean the MENA countries are exhibiting this kind of behavior, or, I mean, it could always, of course, be about the data issues that we're not seeing, much of an impact, with the data on the MENA countries. I mean, there is a large group of MENA countries in the CompuStat data set, which is very nice, but of course, like with some variables, you have a lot of missing observations. So my last slide, some evidence that firms can play an important role in reducing inequality and poverty. So it's not just about like paying taxes. It could be happening through the capital expenditures. Now, this impact is driven by increasing income at the lower end of the income distribution, right? So again, maybe more, happening more through the link to poverty. Than just inequality directly. Robust to a variety of control, country level controls, and we also, slice and dice the data set. So we condition it on the economic fitness, health of the banking sector, unemployment levels. We get the same result. So higher corporate tax rates are not found to reduce inequality or poverty. So I'm not going to go ahead and say that, well, then reduce taxes, that will help with the inequality. I'm not saying that either, right? But again, we are not finding the result that many of you may be thinking. And the MENA countries tend to have lower inequality in the data, based on the data that we are looking at, but they're not different from the other countries in terms of inequality or the poverty results. Now, one policy aspect of this could be that obviously in the US and other places, there's a lot of targeted tax incentives to corporate investment. So since we are finding this positive result for the capital expenditures, so actually the negative result on the inequality, so maybe if we do smart tax policy, tax incentives towards inducing or incentivizing, firms to channel the business profits into especially R&D type expenditures, that could actually help even more, with the inequality and poverty. So that's, I'll just leave it at that.
Wow, and I've got a minute as well, so that's perfect. There you go. Perfect, yeah. I'll go straight to Dr. Kabbashi. Dr. Kabbashi is with the University of Khartoum. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and thank for the BDM for giving me a chance to comment to these two interesting papers. I think the two papers have share a common objective. The major objective of the second, the last paper is to look at the effect of corporate tax and firm-level investment on poverty and inequality, and also the paper by Abdelkhalek in Morocco look at the question of fiscal efficiency or efficiency fiscal policy in reducing poverty and or enhancing progressivity. So both papers use micro data sets. The first data, before that, both papers address very interesting policy issues. Policymakers around the world are interested to know the mechanism by which to reduce poverty and inequality. And also against this background, they are also interested to raise tax revenues, especially after the wake of COVID, and this is expected to continue to the wake of COVID. This rise in firm expenses continue to rise in the future, and also policymakers which wish to reduce the tax loopholes and reform the corporate tax. So both papers provide information for policymakers into this context, and the methods are different, and the conclusion are also different, but the data set is similar. First, paper by Tosun, it built a large databases, so in addition, it collects information on from diverse sources on income inequality, poverty, including on country characteristics such as GDP, economic fitness, unemployment, savings. In addition to these regular determinant of poverty and inequality, also collect data on income inequality and poverty. And I think the comment made by Amira, policy recommendation by Amira, investing on data collection is an asset, and think in this regard, the author should be commended for if this effort of building databases. So they applied for paper participants, they applied they applied regression analysis and different tests of robustness to different measure of inequality and poverty. And for this paper, the result is showing that tax is poverty increasing and inequality increasing, while in the second paper, it has been shown that tax, subsidy transfer, or fiscal policy in general, tax and subsidies are poverty and inequality reducing. So maybe I would say the major value added of the paper by the last paper by Dr. Tosun is that it provides different views on income inequality compared to regular views of decomposition of gross scale into poverty and inequality. So it looks into the causation that runs from poverty and inequality, from income growth to poverty and inequality. And this is very interesting because usually in the standard decomposition, people look at how scale on growth impact poverty and inequality. So viewed in this way, while it's very interesting to see this, kind of different causation, but the result is really irregular in the sense that growth is found in your paper as growth is poverty increasing, and also is inequality increasing. Though the coefficients are not significant in some of the specification. And this also in contrast to what Moroccan paper showed, that they're not talking about growth as such, but fiscal reform, quote unquote, could be poverty and inequality improving. Also, my final maybe comment to Tosun paper is that they use, this may be technical, they used subsamples to test the effects. While this is legitimate and fair enough, why not you use a pool and then instead of dummy using a cutoff? which is preserve degrees of freedom and also provides, further robustness checks. And maybe for the interest of time, giving this vote just comment, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions, comments from the floor?
We'll get you to your train on time. I have a couple of questions. It's a very interesting paper. So my first question is, we think of the corporate tax as a withholding tax because ultimately taxes are paid by individuals when dividends are paid out. So the corporate tax rate, to some extent, its main purpose is not to delay taxes in time. So we withhold tax and then something happens at the individual's levels when dividends are paid. And my question is, do you account for this in your controls? I mean, it doesn't matter, for example, how dividends are taxed in a country and the interaction with the corporate tax rate. And my second question is, do you think the results you get on poverty are related to the fact, which I think is a great point that people typically miss, that the corporate tax actually is shifted back to labor cost? And there's quite a bit of empirical evidence, as you said, in the US and Europe that this is indeed the case. So do you think that this is why, perhaps, that by shifting this back to labor, it could be the reason why increasing the tax actually has a negative impact on increases poverty? And my third point is perhaps a comment, not a question. I couldn't resist because it's probably more related to the first session than this one. We spoke about the social contract, and it seems to me that the social contract in the MENA for the past 3 decades has been essentially energy subsidies and large public service. And this is a point that is missed because, when we talk about increasing spending and taxation, we're basically talking about how much, but not how to do that. We're talking about level of spending, level of taxes, but we're not talking about, spending composition and which and how taxes should be increased if they need to be increased. So I just wanted to leave this with the prior authors as a reflection more than a question. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, please, Niranjan, yeah. Are you responding or are you asking?
No, I have one, maybe
Question.
a clarification. Yes. Thank you. Okay. It's a very interesting paper, particularly the results on capital spending and poverty. And it's some way, maybe a way forward to see it, and somehow it contradicts also earlier findings that you see when capital expenditure and firms and reducing poverty and poverty gap goes against the findings that the labor share of income is not increasing the way the capital spending is increasing. This is one. Second, we also looked at from the MENA countries, if you look at, if you decompose growth, and what is the translation mechanism? The translation mechanism to reduce poverty is employment. But the firms, they hire the labor, basically those skilled. So it helps to improve to certain level, but it doesn't then take it up. I mean, in terms of mobility. So did you look at that aspect in this finding? Thank you.
Yes, can I respond? Okay. Yeah, thanks for all the comments and the questions. I appreciate it. So I'll start. Yeah, the dividends question. So that's interesting. Of course, like the dividends, that's gonna be at the individual income level. I need to check whether Compustat has anything like the corporate, dividend policy related. There may be, but we didn't look at it. So thanks for that comment. So we'll definitely check that. Because so that would be definitely one driver. Because to the extent that is happening, we should see, the corporate profits leading to higher inequality, right? With the poverty, yeah, like, these couple studies that I mentioned, or maybe I didn't get a chance to mention now, thinking about it, they're saying like 50% of the shifting of the tax to wages. So that's huge, right? So like 100% capital, like that's the typical Al Harberger result from the 1960s, to 50% to wages. That will make a big difference. So that could be an important driver for sure. Now, Niranjan's question, so yeah, I mean, it does matter, like what kind of employment, the mobility. I mean, we're not able to capture that with the data, so the CompuStat is giving us firm level data. So I don't know how we can address that using that, but I mean, maybe we can capture it using some additional controls, like more macro controls, for employment, like the type of employment, or like, maybe even like sectoral. Yeah, so that's I'll definitely we'll take that into consideration as well. So.
Thank you very much. Is there something you'd like to add, Dr. Kabbashi, or we good? We're good. Okay. I think I'll also ask Dr. Amira and Dr. Ibrahim if they've got one last word of reaction, and I'll close with Niranjan. You wanted to have one other reaction, or you're good? Good. Okay, so Dr. Amira and Dr. Ibrahim, if there are there any last words, or can we thank each and everyone who's here with us and who's borne with us the fact that we're quite late, but it's been very, 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 and also Dr. Touhami, sorry, Dr. Touhami and Dr. Dorothee, is there one final comment you'd like to make? Okay, I think we're good. Yes, Dr. Ibrahim?
No. Actually, I just want to thank everybody and to say hello to Professor Touhami. It has been a long while, and everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's been very, very rich discussion. Much appreciated. And please manage to get your coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for the useful comments. Bye.
Thank you.